Hi, I'm Peggy Farren, and we are live with the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel, nature, and fine art photography. Welcome to episode number 104. My guest today is Wayne Bennett, and we're going to talk about working a scene for more impact, okay? But first, of course, we're live on Facebook, 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Fridays. Facebook.com/understandphotography. So watch us live, make comments, say hello. And then on Saturdays, we upload the recording to YouTube, youtube.com/understandphotography. And also we upload it as a podcast, so you can listen to it on iTunes or Stitcher, whatever you listen to your podcasts on. So please make comments, write reviews. It all helps us so much. Our signature class, the 4 weeks to proficiency in photography, starts September 19th, okay? So it is an online class, but it's live. I'm right there with you, taking the class with you. I'm right there to answer questions, things like that, to hold your hand, basically. And it's a foundational class. Most photographers are lacking the foundation nowadays. So if you have gaps in your education, or even if you're a beginner, we start the first classes shooting in manual, and you're really going to understand it, because our motto at Understand Photography is we simplify the technical, and we really do. So the second class is all about composition, which we're going to talk a lot about today on this show. And third class is about lighting, including flash. You know, you don't like that real flashy look? Well, learn how to use your flash properly, you won't get it. And the last class is what I call the techie stuff, and it's got like metering modes and drive modes, but you're ready for that by the time you get there. So that starts September 19th. Our website is understandphotography.com. And we also have quite a few trips coming up this season. And I've got deadlines coming up in October for both our ladies workshop in Mount Dora, Florida, which is December 5th through the 7th. It's so much fun. It's the cutest little town, Mount Dora. And we're going to go up at Christmas time to see the lights, and we rent a boat and go through the canals. It's really fun. You get a lot of diverse photography, a lot of learning about night photography too. And then ladies only to Cuba. So my deadlines are both October for those. Cuba is February 2nd to the 9th. And for the guys and ladies, co-ed, Joe Fitzpatrick is leading Everglades, St. Augustine, and the Forgotten Coast, which is the Panhandle in Old Florida. Very cool. So understandphotography.com. So my guest today is photographer Wayne Bennett, and Wayne is a travel and nature photographer who teaches workshops. He leads tours all over really cool places. He's a past president and I believe a founder of the Orlando Camera Club. Am I right there?
Past president.
Not founder?
I've been there since day one, so people accuse me of being one of the founders, but not actually.
Well, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming down from Orlando.
My pleasure.
To our rainy, it rains this much in Orlando.
Well, we have rain up there too,
so
it's,
thing, right?
Yeah, it's Florida.
Yeah, it's Florida in the summer, it's going to rain. Now, all right, just give me, now you were a retired dentist.
Correct.
But you were always into photography.
Yeah, I started actually doing photography about the time I graduated from dental school, because I was given a camera to use, and one of my patients in the military base where I was stationed ran the photo lab, and we used to go out on weekends into the woods and photograph, and that's really where I started my love for nature.
Long time. Now, when did you start the workshops?
I started the workshops probably 10 or 12 years ago.
Oh, so you've been doing them a long time.
Yeah, but I do a very limited number, because it's, as you know, it's a lot of work to put a workshop together.
It sure is.
It's time consuming, but I love doing it, and I've got certain parts of the country that I really enjoy traveling to and bringing people to.
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I love the Southwest. My big workshop is in the Four Corners area, where we do north central Arizona around Page, and we also do southeastern Utah.
Oh, wow. I've never been to that area at all.
It's absolutely gorgeous.
Wow. Now, how do you decide on where to go when you're doing a workshop?
Well, when I taught with Great American Photography Weekends.
Is that how you got started with workshops?
That's how I got started, yes.
Were you just like a workshop participant, and then you got to know the people and started teaching? Is that what happened? Or?
Yeah, in sort of a roundabout way.
Okay.
A friend of mine owned a company called Print File, which sold archival slide holders. And the first GAPW, so the quickest way to pronounce
Great
it.
American.
Photography Weekend.
Okay.
Used a product from California, which was PVC. Now PVC will ruin slides because it'll leach into the slides and actually ruin them. So I got him in touch with my friend who owned Printfile, and he became a national sponsor, and I was invited to be their guest whenever I wanted to, and then worked my way into a teaching position.
Oh, okay.
Did it for about 15 years.
With them, but they're not around anymore, right?
No.
Okay,
No.
that's what I thought. Now, is that how you met all the movers and shakers that
Yes.
you know in the photography
Yes.
world, from the workshops and
Yeah.
from the camera club too? I would imagine a little bit. And
Well, most of these people I brought to the camera club.
okay,
Yeah, but you know, a lot of the movers and shakers, if you will, I've known for so many years. I can just pick up a phone and call them, and which makes it very interesting.
now
Makes it fun.
you have. We're going to talk a little bit about Wayne, and then we'll get into the guts of the teaching. But you have a filter named after you from Stingray.
Stingray.
And Stingray's based right here in Florida, in Punta Gorda, not Punta
Arcadia.
Gorda, Arcadia.
Yes.
That's right, Arcadia, Florida. And tell the story about the filter that's the Wayne Bennett filter. Is that
It's called the
what's
Smoky Vision Polarizer.
the Smoky Vision Polarizer?
Yes.
All right. So explain that. How did that come to be?
Well, Bob Singh, when he was alive, was a very good friend of mine. And I used to go down to Arcadia every couple of months just to spend some time with him. And he would always ask, well, is there anything I can do for you? And, you know, he talks to you in nanometers, which I really don't understand, and how light works. And that's the reason the filters were so good, because he really understood light. But one day, he was down there. He said, well, is there anything I can do for you? And I said, well, you know, I use polarizers an awful lot. And I said, I sometimes will stack a diffuser on top of the polarizer, and I'm talking about very light diffusion, just to give an image sort of an ethereal feel.
Okay.
And he said, well, let me see what I can do. 2 weeks later, he calls me and says, I got a filter for you.
All right. Now let's, just in case our audience isn't familiar, a polarizing filter, a CPL, we stand for circular
Polarizer.
polarizing lens. Is that what the L stands for?
No, I think the PL, well, not sure what the L stands for.
We're like, we don't know. Anyway, so that is going to reduce glare in your picture, right?
Well,
So
it'll reduce glare. It'll, at 90 degrees to the sun, it'll increase the intensity of the sky.
Okay, you mean the saturation,
Saturation of the
basically.
sky.
Okay. So that's one filter. The other filter,
Sort of gives a soft feel to your.
so does it?
It doesn't make the image unsharp. It just gives it the illusion of being soft.
Like
So
fog, kind of, but
Yeah.
very, very, very,
Yeah,
very
but
light.
you're sort of getting a soft, sharp image, if you will.
So the Wayne Bennett Smoky Vision Polarizer is those two combined.
Yes.
That is cool.
And it's built on his golden blue polarizer, which sort of controls the golden blue, so you can go from very blue coloration to very gold coloration and anywhere by turning the filter.
The lens.
And it's integrated on that, but because of the diffusion factor, it's not as strong. And you get some really very interesting results.
That's so cool.
And,
wow, a filter named after you. You're so important.
well, I don't know about that.
That's so cool. All right, so now let's talk about our topic, which is working the scene.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's start from the beginning. How do you scout for a good location in general?
Well,
Like, just say from in your hometown is Orlando, or where do you live in Orlando? Or?
I live in Sanford, which is about 20 miles north of Orlando.
With Reg. Oh, Reg. So say you're going to do a photo shoot in downtown Sanford, Florida.
Okay, well, you know, it's a scouting procedure. I do a lot of studying in advance of places where I'm going to shoot, so I don't go any place cold. So I have a feel for what I'm going to see when I get there. And we can say more so about scenic areas and foresty areas rather than, you know, cityscapes. But
Okay, well, let's go there then.
Yeah.
Where did you St. John River? Don't you have that around there?
yeah, it goes right through, right through Lake Monroe.
The only reason I know is because Reg
Reg was here, yes.
He posts so much stuff all the time, so I feel like I know the Sanford area at this point.
Yeah, the St. Johns River goes basically right through the middle of Lake Monroe, which is...
So you're going to be telling us, okay, so let's,
Yeah, so
you're going to scope out a place. How are you going to do it?
Let me just sort of back up a little bit.
Okay.
I used to bring people out to shoot, and we used to see this in workshops we did where people would just get out of their car, they'd plop a tripod down, stick their camera on the tripod and start taking pictures.
Okay.
You know, maybe fine and dandy and you may get some winners, but you really don't understand what's in front of you. And I always take my tripod out first and set it down because I know I'm going to use it, but then I sort of walk an area, you know, and see what's in front of me because I try to determine what my subject's going to be and what, I sort of call it the star of the show and then the supporting cast. And movies are successful because they have a good star and they have a good supporting cast and they work hand in hand with one another. And I found that with even in nature because there are certain objects in nature which work well with other things around them, and there are certain things in nature that don't work well with things around them.
Okay.
So I find that by walking around, I can see the spatial relationship between what I want my subject to be.
And when you say spatial relationship, you mean how far away it is from?
Well, it's the relationship they have with one another. So say if we have these two cups in this book, if I'm sitting here and looking at them, there's a relationship between the three. But if I move to where you are, the relationship changes. They're still in the same place, but the relationship to one another changes.
Okay.
So if one of them is my subject, then the other two are the supporting cast, if you will, and their relationship to my subject is going to change, sometimes for the better,
based on your
sometimes
angle.
Based on my angle.
So you walk around the scene to find the best angle.
Yes.
And go ahead.
And I sort of have an idea of what to expect, and I will try to anticipate, especially with sunrises, where the sun's going to be. And I've taken some really interesting series of images where I've anticipated correctly. I've also taken some where I have not anticipated correctly, but nobody sees those.
Yeah, delete.
Yeah.
All right, so you're going to get there, you're going to walk around to find the best angle, you're going to look low, you're going to look high, you're going to look sideways.
Yeah.
So how do you determine what you're, like, what's a good subject? If you have a landscape, let's just say. So how
do I determine what's a good subject?
What's the supporting, how do you determine what's the subject, what's the supporting, what'd you call it?
Supporting cast. Well, I sort of, I'll pick out a subject. I mean, if there's something that's dominant in a scene, then that'll probably become my subject, and I'll just work things around it. But once I walk around and see how things look, then I'll sort of have a pecking order in my mind as to where I want to start and where I want to move, because I can actually be within say a 25 or 50 yard stretch of real estate and create so many different images using the same subject matter, but they all look different.
Just from changing your angle.
Just changing my angle.
Yeah, okay. So when you say, see now when you were saying spatial, I was thinking you meant like, because to me separation is a big, important part of composition, you know? And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they don't get that things
separation,
need separation. That's what I thought you were talking about.
No.
So.
But I do look for separation because one of the things I learned early on is that if you're trying to emphasize a subject, if it merges with something else, then it takes away from the impact of the subject. So there were some places I could stand and not have a merge, some places I could stand and have a merge. And I usually take both pictures because for teaching purposes, if you show somebody a good picture, you have to show them a bad picture so they'll know why the good one's good.
And you know, I just started doing that when I didn't start doing it right away when I started teaching, but like 5 years after I started teaching, I used to throw the bad ones away, and then I'm like, what am I doing? Because this is, you know, but whatever. I'm a slow learner.
Well, I did the same thing. I would always throw out the bad ones, but I said, well, you know.
All right, so let's take a landscape scene. You know, break it down for me. So okay, so you walked around. You're like, and you're going to take the same picture from different angles, or the same subject from different angles. But that's kind of too
Pretty much.
simplified, right? So
Yeah,
help me, you know.
I can give you one scenario which
Okay.
was probably turned out better for me than a lot that I've done. It was a foggy morning. We saw a tree line with heavy fog over it, and it was starting to get a little bit light where the sun was going to come up.
Okay.
But there were a lot of trees around it. So I knew I wanted to take a picture at this one particular place of the sun coming up. So I walked around, and there was a group of trees, and I took a picture there just as sort of reference, and went a little bit past it, and there was this one small tree all by itself with Spanish moss on it. It was just really beautiful, and I was thinking to myself, well, if I time everything right, then I can get the sunrise, I can run over to where that tree is, and at my age, run is a fast walk. so I would,
Especially with heavy gear.
Especially with gear, and I would, get another viable image. So the sun comes up, and it's just absolutely beautiful. I mean, the color is magnificent, the big ball of sun. So I got a couple of pictures that I wanted. Then I walked over to where the tree was, and the sun was behind the tree in the fog with all these God fingers coming out of the
those
tree.
Rays,
And it was just,
I love that.
it was just absolutely spectacular. But if I hadn't have walked around and found that tree, because it wasn't visible from where I started, I'd have never gotten that image. So there's a lot of value to just not plopping your stuff down and shooting, because there's a lot of stuff out there to shoot, but you can't shoot it if you don't know it's there.
Right. So really scope out the area and figure out,
Yeah.
and figure out more than one shot.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like,
yeah.
Because I know sometimes I'm like, oh, look at this is it, and then again, walking around, you can see the.
Well,
the
sometimes you get lucky,
shot.
sometimes you don't,
And you were doing this in the dark, obviously, since it was before sunrise.
well, it wasn't completely dark. I mean, we could see where we were.
Yeah.
And we just stood along a fence line, because this is all farmland. And, fortunately, the farmers around there are very tolerant of photographers, as long as we stay off the road and don't go on their property, which I don't go on anybody's property without permission.
Yeah.
But it's just a procedure that I've sort of gotten used to doing, and it's been very successful for me.
Okay, so let's expand.
Okay.
'Cause what else? What else are we looking for?
Well,
what else are we going to do to work the scene other than walk around? That's.
Well, I consider working the scene. I sort of see it in three parts. There's
Okay.
a pre-visualization,
Okay.
which is stuff that I do at home before I even get to where I'm going.
And what do you mean by that?
I sort of I go to a lot of areas with which I have some familiarity, and I have an idea of what's going to be there. Never know exactly what the weather conditions are going to be like, or whether there's going to be fog, or whether it's going to be sunny, or
Okay.
whatever. But I have a general idea that I'm going to go and this is what I want to shoot.
Okay.
Then when I get there, I'll do my walk around and see what's there. So this is all part of the first part. Second part is what I actually see through the camera, because that's your bread and butter stuff. I mean, you can pre-visualize all day,
Right.
but that doesn't give you any
Yeah.
images. So you've got to compose through the camera, whether it be from one spot or whether it be from multiple spots. And then the third part is post-processing, and I don't spend a lot of time in that, but I'm a big believer in judicious cropping, because sometimes you don't always, have the lens you want, or sometimes you've got to make some adjustments. But I don't do a lot of post-processing. I've always considered that to be an adjunct to a good photograph, rather than making a bad photograph good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we looking for when we're walking around?
Well, it's really kind of interesting, and I may have to digress just a little bit. A couple of years ago, we had a juried gallery exhibit with our camera club, and we all had to write artist statements. Well, I had never written an artist statement, and I was like a fish out of water. So I thought about it. I thought about the experiences I've had in photography, and Mother Nature, if you look at it, if you stop along the side of the road and look at a forest, or look at, seems to be very chaotic. But within that chaos, there is a rhythm and there is a flow and there is an order.
Okay.
So as a photographer, my goal is to make order out of the chaos that I see in front of me. So that's basically where I went with my artist statement.
That's
So,
cool. That's cute. I like it.
yes. So I sent it to Rob Shepard, who at that particular time was editor of Outdoor Photographer, and he called me back and he said, "You familiar with Elliot Porter?" And I said, "Well, I have one of his books, but I'm not that familiar with him." He said, "Well, he wrote a book called Chaos in Nature," and he was really surprised that what I said was so close to what Elliot Porter said. So I sort of used that as my, I'm trying to think of the word.
Like your starting point?
Sort of my starting point, and realizing that everything I see is not going to be in a neat order, but I know within that order, or within that chaos, there is some order, and if I can separate that out, then I can get good, viable images.
So how do you separate it out? How do you know? What do you, all right, so you're going to go take a picture of,
well,
you know, let's say we go out in the Everglades. Now I know I'm not going to tell you just yet. I might tell you in the show, but how I scout out locations in the Everglades. But how are you going to, what are you looking for?
I'm obviously very visual, but every scene you see has lines, shapes, forms, color, textures, and patterns.
Okay, so that's what you're looking for?
So that's what I'm looking for. And I'm looking not necessarily just for those, but the way they interact with one another.
Okay.
I remember years ago, Brian Peterson and I we were doing a workshop in out west, and he saw this one circular area with some straight lines that were dissecting it, and he called it his curvilinear picture. But I never really thought of working with straight lines against curved lines, because I always consider those to be separate things.
Okay.
But the more I thought about it, the more I thought about, well, that's what nature does. Mother Nature doesn't sit around and say, okay, I'm going to put all the circles here, I'm going to put all the straight lines here, and I'm going to put all the reds here. You know, they're all mixed in, but there is an order to it if you look through what's in front of you to see that order.
Okay.
And a lot of times I'll just look visually. Sometimes I'll look through a camera, because especially with the good zoom lenses we have now, you can actually zoom in and see how things are going to look, close up.
Like if you compress them, you mean? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, compressing it and just taking parts of an area, because I may look at this wall right here and not see a lot, but if I zoom in on a small area of it, I may see a lot of patterns and a lot of textures and colors that work well together.
But if you're doing a landscape, you wouldn't be doing that, right? You wouldn't be zooming in like that, or what would you?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay. What kind of lines do you see in landscape photography?
Well, you see straight lines with trees. If you're in fog, when the sun's coming up, you can see horizontal lines of the, what I call God fingers, the rays. There are circular lines. I mean, pine trees have cones. The canopies of trees are circular.
Okay.
And sometimes working that circular part with something straight can give it impact. Also look at the textures. Pine trees in particular, because of the pine needles.
Yeah.
If you look into the pine needles, there are a lot of parallel diagonal lines which work well with straight lines.
And another good reason to shoot in the golden hour, because then you're going to have a lot more texture in those pine needles or whatever, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, there are some landscapes I'll do it, in the non-golden hours, but I try to always get to wherever I'm going before sunrise, because you can't capture a sunrise if you get there at noon. So.
Yeah, and the sunset, which of course here I'm on the West Coast, the sunset, but it's, it's people are awake.
Yes.
If you're up at dawn, you have a nicer chance to get
we have
people.
We have less traffic.
Yeah, less traffic. That's the word.
Less human traffic.
Okay, so all right, so let's say that we have this clump of pine trees and it looks like a really pretty picture. What's the next step?
Okay, I try to think in my mind of the ways I can use what I see in front of me. Now, there is one place outside of Orlando that we go to all the time, and I bring people there to sort of teach them this spatial relationship thing. And it's on a pasture. It has one really large pine tree, and during the winter, which is the best time to get there because we can get fog and get these big beautiful sunrises to the east. But to one side of this tree, there's an oak tree, there's another small pine tree, and a third tree. I'm not a master of my types of trees, but 3 different type trees that are next to this, you know, off to the side of this palm tree. So my thought is to use the palm tree as my subject matter, and use the other trees and the sun coming up as the supporting cast, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I'll take it from put the palm tree in, you know, one side of the image with the sun behind it.
Is the palm tree bigger?
Yes, palm tree is closer.
It's closer.
It may not be bigger, but I've never been all the way into the pasture to know how tall the other ones are. But then I'll move to the other side, move the palm tree to the other side, just by moving. So the sun has a different relationship with the palm tree, as do the other 3 trees. And then I can walk around so the palm tree can be flanked by these trees, mm-hmm. you know, all with the sun, you know, in a good position. And then sometimes I'll do a regular standard format type shot, and then I'll sometimes do a panoramic.
Oh, okay.
You know, so I just sort of try to visualize my mind how I can make everything in front of me work to its maximum benefit.
Okay. So okay, so those are some ways to create different feels from the same
area.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What about you know, foreground, background, anchoring subjects and things like that? What can you?
Very, very cognizant of that.
Okay, so tell us about that.
Foreground and background can, well, they can do 2 things. They can either make your image great or they can make it lousy, mm-hmm. depending on how you use it. Okay. For many years, and I still do bird photography, but with a lot of bird photography, I try to minimize my foreground and minimize my background, so my subject stands out. You can do the same with landscape too, depending on the separation of what you determine your subject to be and the background or foreground. Now, if you're photographing, say, a barn that's 200 or 300 yards away with the mountains behind it, it may not be able to get good separation because you just can't get close enough to the barn to do that. Right. But I try to make my foreground and background emphasize the strengths of my subject rather than take away from the strength of my subject by either eliminating them, and that's done by where I stand.
So you can get up higher or down lower or whatever.
Or de-emphasizing them, controlling my depth of field with f-stop.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Because a lot of times, if you have too much in the foreground and your eye spends too much time in the foreground before it gets to your subject, then I don't think your image is as successful as an image where you look at it and it goes right to your subject. Yeah. You say, oh, that's what he wants me to see.
Although sometimes your foreground could have some beautiful lines that go right to.
Yeah, and
Clyde Butcher that's one of his things is you have it open in the front of the picture to draw you back to the subject. You know?
But he doesn't have any really. If he's, say, photographing, cloud patterns, he'll have the swamp in front of it, but he's not going to have any really big trees that are going to interfere with it. No,
but he'll have marshy leading lines going to a diagonal towards the back of the picture or something like that. Not every picture, obviously, but he has a lot of that.
But that doesn't just happen.
Oh, I know. He's the master.
Yeah, he doesn't just walk out there and take one picture. Now, he may at times, and I'm sure everyone has been lucky enough to have a wonderful picture that, you get with one snap of a shutter. But most of the time, you have to put some thought and effort behind getting a quality image.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, though. That's what that's what his thing about foregrounds is. The foreground should lead to your, should have some kind of like welcome into my picture.
Well, in the type of landscapes he does, that's very, that really does work.
I thought that was a big,
Yes, and I do. If I'm doing a really sweeping landscape of mountains, then I will use foreground elements, but I won't use foreground elements at the expense of what I'm photographing.
Right.
because I think it's really important to have your viewer know what your subject is. I was taught early on that if you look at an image and your eye just jumps from spot to spot in an image, trying to find out what the subject is, then you really don't have a successful image.
Right. It should. I agree with that completely. You should know exactly what you're supposed to be looking at when you look at the picture.
I've always felt the less is more in photography.
Yeah, I agree with that. But what if you have like a wooded landscape? That's not less is more. How do you simplify that?
Well, there are a couple of ways. I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You can isolate certain parts of that landscape and put emphasis on that. And it can be by the focal length of your lens or controlling your depth of field. Or if you have a lot of confusion and a lot of stuff that would be hard to separate anything, then you do something on the grand scale like Clyde Butcher does, where you show everything and say this is a forest, you know, rather than this is a tree in the forest. So that's, and I think that's where the pre-planning and some of the pre-visualization, you know, comes about, because it makes you think about what you're photographing and what you're going to do with what's in front of you.
How long do you, if you're like you're leading a photo trip and you go to one beautiful spot in Utah, how long do you stay in one spot?
Usually long enough to keep my participants happy, and also to get them the quality of images I think they should be getting. But you've got to understand that when I take somebody in Utah to a particular spot, I've been there before, and I know that under certain lighting conditions and certain times of day, this is what they're going to get. So I can tell them where to stand, and I don't take pictures for them. I'll say, you know, if you set up your tripod, this is going to be in front of you, and then I'll look through their cameras and you know, and help them with their images. And sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. Fortunately, for the most part, they do like the little changes I make.
How long would you stay in a spot, on average?
An hour to 2 hours.
An hour to 2 hours.
Yeah.
In the same spot?
Well, not the same spot, but within a certain area.
Okay.
Yeah. There are some places we go where we do some fairly major hiking, where you've got a small area where it's possible to work the area for a while. You know, from different angles and different vantage points. And but if we've walked an hour into some place, I'm not going to stay there 5 minutes and walk back.
Yeah.
I'm going to give them
you probably take stops along the way too to see.
Yeah, if we see something. Yeah, I'm not that hard-nosed about sticking to a firm schedule. I will stick to a schedule, but if we see something photography worthy in between, I mean, you're there.
You got to do it.
You got to do it because you can't go back. The light will never be the same, and conditions will never be the same. And
now you do photo tours to the Palouse quite often, or you've been there many times. Once a year. So what if I were going out to the Palouse, which they call and that's in Washington, the state of Washington,
and Idaho.
And Idaho, I didn't know that. And they say it's the Tuscany of the United States.
It's beautiful.
So now I've never been there, but I've been to Tuscany. And so photo tips for that area, because that has the rolling hills, but it's mostly farmland.
Okay.
Not trees, not a lot of trees.
Very few trees, very few animals. Last year we saw a couple of deer, but that's rare. There are some treed areas, but they're very uncommon. Tips for the Palouse: go out early, go out late, during the middle of the day, edit your images. Or if you're so inclined, you can drive around and photograph more, but you see more graphic detail early in the morning and late at night, because the hills, you know, do overlap one another. You get shadows, you get patterns, you get fantastic textures. And the beauty of the Palouse is they rotate their crops out there. So we photographed some fields this year, and I know when I go back next year, it's not going to be the same crop in the field, so it's going to be totally different. You may have the beautiful yellow canola one year, you may have, you know, rows of wheat crop the next year, you just never know. But my biggest tip, and I think the most important thing with the Palouse, if you go out there by yourself or even with a tour, is to give the farmers the courtesy they deserve, because you are is private property. I don't encourage going onto anybody's property without going to the house and asking permission. And I've been out there enough that I know if you give that courtesy to the farmers, they will bend over backwards to not only let you photograph on their property, but tell you other places to go.
Okay, so let's give some photo tips though of these vast landscapes. What kind of lens do I bring?
Excuse me. You can actually shoot anything from an ultra wide angle to a long telephoto.
Okay.
Because we bring people up to Steptoe Butte, and Steptoe Butte rises about 900 feet above the Palouse. So evening shots are the best as the sun's going down, because you get just beautiful textures, and it seems to go on forever. And when I photograph there, I do a number of things. I look at areas where I can see a flow that's not interrupted by a tree line or by a house or
And what do you mean
building.
by a flow? A flow of what?
Well, the hills almost look like waves.
Okay.
You know, waves of green.
Okay.
And the textures and the patterns and the colors just seem to overlap one another, and it gives you sort of a wavy type flow.
Okay.
And as a good example, I say there weren't a lot of trees out there, but I photographed this one thing a couple of years ago. It was a beautiful scenic where there was a line of trees, which is probably around a farm. There were some beautiful rolling hills, another line of trees, and some rolling hills in front of us. So I took that picture, but I took that picture because I had thought that would make two great panoramas. You know, so I sort of divided it in half, and the top half was a panorama, and the second half was a panorama, and both of them were a lot stronger than the first image I took.
Oh, because you cropped the middle of the...
I just I took my original image.
Slid it in half on Photoshop.
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh,
and got
okay.
two great images, but...
So you're looking for that flow, and it's just going to be a horizontal,
yes,
wavy line, but
Yeah.
it's going to have colors and patterns and texture
especially
to
as
it.
the sun gets lower toward the horizon.
And wouldn't that be better with a long lens to compress it, or
I do it both ways.
you do it both ways
Yeah.
just to see the different?
Now there are some buildings out there. There's some grain silos. There are some farms that you can see from a distance, and I don't always follow all the good compositional rules, because I feel sometimes stronger images or images would break those rules.
Okay.
But I will place those structures in such a way so I can get the flow, but I've also got the
Like the silo.
hand of man, if you will.
But that'll be like in a PowerPoint, or
Yeah, the
no, or
PowerPoint.
you don't?
Well,
You do think about the
do.
the
Yes,
composition rules, or you don't?
I do,
Okay.
but I do break them.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we all break them, but
Yeah.
it's good to know. I think it's really important to know the rules, because
Well, you can't break them if you don't know them. So,
good, exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And you know, once you learn them, you can really see why they're the rules that they are, because most of the time they really will make your
they make
picture
images,
better.
yes. Yeah.
You know.
But you know, especially in the Palouse where you've got that flow, you have to decide where, if you're putting a structure in your image, you know, do you want the structure to be in the left? Do you want it to be in the right?
Do you
And-
center it? Ever?
Pardon?
Do you ever center?
They're usually not.
Why not? Let's just for audience.
I
I
think-
think I know why not, but I want
Well,
everybody else to
yeah.
know why not.
I'm not a big fan of bullseyeing.
Bullseyeing, is that the center?
Yeah, when you put your subject right in the center. I will do it if I can get an equal and opposite top, like a reflection.
Oh, yeah.
Or if I have something that's very symmetrical.
Right.
And if I were to cut it in half, it would look the same in the top as it does in the bottom. But a lot of times it creates an uncomfortable asymmetry to your picture.
Plus, I think you would, especially like I'm thinking of the Palouse, which of course I've never been there. I've seen pictures, but I have been to Tuscany. And because you have those beautiful hills, which are the supporting cast, if you're, let's say the silo is your main character, I'm trying to use your terminology. You need room for the supporting
Yes.
cast too, because if you put that silo in the middle, you're
Then it
sort
breaks
of,
it up.
Yeah, your supporting
Breaks up your
cast
flow.
doesn't even you don't even notice it, right? It just
True.
disappears.
Well, your eye goes right to the
and
center.
then the silo is that's not that
Yeah.
pretty without the supporting cast, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I like that, supporting cast. That's cool.
Well, you know, I was trying to think of some terminology to use and I'm sort of putting together a presentation for some young school kids, and I was, you know, they all go to movies, so I'm saying there's a star of every movie, which is your subject, and there's a supporting cast. And which one is more important? Well, they're both important, but they're important for different reasons. Star can't carry a movie without having good support around him, and supporting cast isn't very good unless you have a star to give it an anchor point. So I sort of, you know, sort of weave that thought line into my photography.
It's really cute. Now, what other composition rules do you feel strongly about? We already talked about separation, because that's one of my things. Like separation, you have to think about separation all the time. I'm like harping on everybody.
Well, you know, I try to, and I don't dwell on this, but you know, we're always taught about using S curves and C curves and reverse C curves, and I don't look for them specifically, but I do. If I am going to incorporate a foreground, I try to look for something that can lead my eye into my subject. Doesn't necessarily have to be an S. It can just be a, you know, a straight line.
Or diagonal.
Or diagonal, because
fabulous.
diagonal is signs of strength, you know, so diagonal is maybe not that kind of strength. So but I do look for that. You know, I also look for the direction and the quality of the light, because, I mean, we are photographing light, and
so let's talk about that.
Okay.
If you're let's say you've got that palm tree, and the direction of the light is from where you're standing is coming from the left. So what are you going to do with it? What's better? Is it better to be at the left? Is it better to be on your back? Is it better when you're moving around? You're looking at where the light's hitting the palm tree, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
So what are you looking for on the palm tree to make it look cool?
Ooh, I never really thought about that. I just sort of have an overall feel for what I see when I get there, but
I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay. Well, I try not to. I try not to have light that's too overbearing.
Yeah, like harsh.
Yeah.
But if you're early
in the morning, you're not going to get that.
So it's coming from the left.
If you can get side lighting, then if I'm going to have side lighting on the right-hand side of a tree, which means that, you say the light's coming from the left?
Left side, yeah.
Okay, so the left side of the tree. Then I want my subject matter to be on the right-hand side of my image, because your eye will go right to that light.
So the light kind of leads you to the subject.
And hopefully you've got something as a foreground element that'll lead it there. But if you have your strong lighting element on the left, then your eye's going to go there and it's going to stop.
Because it's
and
going to
it may
dark.
get to what's on the other side of the tree. It may not. So you've got to be cognizant of.
So the light will lead your eye too.
The light can. The light can.
Okay.
And it doesn't always have to be good light. I used to always think that, well, you know, if it's raining, I'm not going to go out and photograph anything. But man, I tell you, I get some wonderful images in the rain, and I love shooting in the fog.
Yeah. You know, I just started getting up early, and my dream is to get up early enough to photograph fog. I haven't done that yet. Or get up and get out. I mean, I get up, but I don't function really.
Well,
but you got to get your butt out of bed and out into the Everglades or whatever. For me, it's to be the Everglades, of course.
Yeah. Well, it's like the one picture that you had on your promo with the fence line going under a tree.
Oh, your picture of the fence.
Yeah, in Ocala. That's a beautiful picture without fog, but on a foggy morning, it gave it that ethereal feel, even without using that filter. It just gave it that great feel, because it takes away the harshness, if you will, and just softens things, but it really makes things work.
Yeah, that's a beautiful picture. And we'll put that picture in the show notes, by the way, to the audience, so you can look at it. I used it for promoting the show on our Facebook page, and shared it, but I don't remember where. Yeah. Okay. So what else? What else? Any other compositional elements that people should be looking out for, or thinking about while they're walking around, they're working the scene, they're looking for their subject, they're looking at the light, they're looking for leading lines, shapes?
Well, You know, shape has a lot to do with it. You know, and I say shape and form because you can have shapes that don't have form. So this almost sounds like a silly thing to say, but a lot of times when you're walking around and you see it, then you know it's right.
Yeah.
And it could break all the compositional rules. But if it's something that's you know, that's pleasing to the eye, you know, it doesn't matter.
The nice thing about digital too is you just take the picture, and then when you can decide later if it's good. Sometimes, you know what I mean?
Well,
if you think it's going to be good or you don't know, I take so many pictures I just throw away later because I think it's going to be good at the time, and then I get home and it's not so great. And then vice versa, I'll take a picture that I'm like, I don't know if this is good, and I'll get home, I'm like, wow, this is so cool.
Well, you know, I do a talk on cropping, and I call it judicious cropping, and a lot of people will take images, and the example I use is if you see something in the distance that you say you wish you had a 300 millimeter lens to take the picture with, but all you have is 100, and it's something that really could be meaningful to you, you know, take the picture and then crop into it later.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, the newer cameras now have got 24 megapixels up to 50 megapixels.
Yeah, crazy.
The first professional camera I bought is 4.5 megapixels. So I can take that 24 megapixel capture and take a sixth of it and have more megapixels than I had in my expensive digital camera that I bought 10 years ago. And the quality of the pixels is better. So, you know, don't ever be afraid to not take something because you don't have the right equipment.
Right. And cropping, you know, in our composition class, which by the way is in the 4 weeks to proficiency in photography starting September 19th, but in our composition class, at the end of it we have several pictures and we just crop them different ways and show how cool it could look this way, or sometimes it looks better that way. Sometimes it looks good with two completely different crops. You never know. Cropping is one of those great tools that we can
We
use.
did an exercise in our camera club where we actually put one of my images on the web and on our site for people to download, and it was before I did this presentation, and we wanted people to take that image and manipulate it any way they wanted to, specifically with cropping. And you'd be surprised how many good different images you got.
So,
it's just...
So play around with that crop tool, but also play around with cropping in camera, where you're
I would much rather do an in-camera crop than one in post-processing, but sometimes you don't always have the equipment. I mean, and if you don't, like I said, if you don't have the equipment and you've got something that you really want to photograph, I mean, photograph it.
Yeah.
Worst thing you can do is delete it.
Yeah.
But the best case scenario is you can crop it and make it into a viable image.
Yeah, that's awesome advice.
Yeah.
I know. I take a lot of pictures just for snapshots too. I don't think there's any shame in just taking pictures for memories sometimes, you know.
Not at all.
Every picture you take doesn't have to be a work of art.
No.
You know, sometimes you just want to remember the feeling.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, so.
But, you know, my just take in this whole thing is that the more preparation you put into something, the odds of you getting a viable image that people are going to enjoy looking at improve.
What if you're going somewhere you've never been?
There's still so much stuff in the web and so much stuff in print.
So you would go and research that area on the internet, maybe Google Earth or something like that. And
yeah, I do use Google Earth.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know.
Yeah, because we've, you know, I've been to 40 different countries, and most of them are countries that I'm going to for the first time.
Right. Yeah.
And it's impossible for me to know exactly what I'm going to get. But I do a lot of research by the Lonely Planet guides or Photo's Guide, and because there's photography in there, it gives you an idea of, you know, what you're going to be up against. And when I travel and get to a place, I don't let any moss grow under my feet. I walk around and get my bearings. I may not take a lot of pictures when I first get there, but at least I walk around to get my bearings and have an idea of where I want to go and how I want to photograph it, and, you know, how to approach it at a later date.
I'm a big fan of buying photography guides or hiring a photography guide. That's even better, I've learned.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when I went to Tuscany, I don't know where to go, you know, and I don't want to look in a book and try to figure it out. So I hired somebody to take me. And that's what Joe did when he went to the Palouse. He went with somebody who knew the area, and you're one of those people who, you know, for me it's the best way, and I'm not that arrogant that I think I'm not going to learn anything either, even though I've got more experience than most of the people taking me around. But sometimes they've got something that they know that I didn't know, or they've got to do.
I think you'd have to be, and this is me proselytizing, if you will, but I think you'd have to be pretty arrogant to think that you can't learn anything new.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I go out with the same guys all the time. We spend a lot of time together in a car photographing and talking about photography, and we always come back learning something new.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
That's really fun.
Yeah, it's just really fun. It makes it all worthwhile.
And you know, that is part of my advice to everybody, is to join a camera club, or at least find a photo buddy or two, because you always get more out of it. You know, our camera club went out to the pier and light painted the pier the other night, and it was so much fun. It was fun to be around the people, and it was fun to experiment. Of course, nobody did it exactly how I wanted it, but you know. And Joe was on the other team, and he was like, our team did better. I'm like, no, yours didn't. Because we had one team lighting up the pier and the other team taking the picture, and then we switched.
You got to hold up the banner for the home team.
It was fun. It was really fun. It's just, you just always learn with, even if you're just a bunch of amateurs. You don't have to be with real experienced people to learn something, although it does help. All right, so what else? Do we have any, what are your top 5 tips? Ooh, throwing that out there.
Wow.
That wasn't in the questions I sent you. Top 3. Top 3.
Top 3? Well, think about what you're doing before you go to shoot.
Okay.
And that's probably part of the pre-visualization part. Understand your equipment. You know, we didn't even talk about that, but I think that's a prerequisite to any photography. I don't care, you know, how good a camera you have if you don't know how to use it.
You know, and I'm going to interrupt you right in the middle on number 2, because when we did go to shoot the pier, and I'm always harping on my class, the 4 weeks to proficiency, but I cannot believe how few people understand the basics of photography, because they're doing everything in automatic. So the guys who organized the shoot had everything planned out. You were going to be in bulb mode. It was going to be a 60 to 80 second exposure, blah, 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 which is pretty simple stuff if you have any basic understanding. Mm-hmm. Well, there were 50 people there, and 90% of them had no clue how to use bulb and this and that. So they had to change everything so that everybody could shoot in manual at 30 seconds, and, you know, changed everything basically, because out of 50 people, you know, 40 of them who are avid photographers didn't understand basic exposure.
Well, you know, I love digital photography.
And I might be exaggerating on the numbers, but I don't think so.
I love digital photography, but I think if there's any drawback to it, in my mind, and then I'll get to my 3,
I know
is that the cameras are so sophisticated, the optics are so good, the metering systems are wonderful, that you really don't have to know anything about photography to get good images. Mm-hmm. However, you can't get repeatable images. If you understand the basics of photography, you can go back to the same spot every day and create an image that looks the same every day. I mean, if the lighting conditions are the same. So I may change my order a little bit. I think maybe, you know, understand your equipment would probably be number 1, because without an understanding of your equipment,
or your equipment and photography in general.
In general.
I mean, I could go onto a Nikon camera and still know what to do. It just might take me a little while to find the button.
Exactly. Number 2 would be to prepare yourself for where you're going.
Okay.
So you have an idea of what you're going to see when you get there. And by preparing, I mean just know the lay of the land, know what the weather's going to be like, have an idea of what the lighting conditions are going to be like. And third, I would say, don't be afraid to break the rules. Shoot a lot and don't be afraid to break the rules.
I like it. Those are 3 good points.
Yeah.
So what's coming up next for you, Wayne?
I'm doing a lot of, short travel
Well, I
things.
know you're doing a talk to some children.
Yeah, I just found out about that yesterday. I've got to teach third and fourth graders the basics of photography.
That sounds like
not
fun.
not going into
Not the technical stuff.
not the technical stuff,
You're going
but
to do some composition, or
do compositional things. But yeah, I'm sort of doing it on a real, basic
third grade level.
Yeah.
That's going to be fun. I
So
bet.
it'll be fun. It'd be interesting to see what they do, because most of them are either going to shoot with with camera phones or small point and shoot cameras. So I can't go into a lot of technical detail because they can't control depth of field.
Anyway, yeah.
But I can teach them how to look at things through their camera and get images that, from a compositional point of view, will make their parents proud.
Well, that's cool.
Make
And then
them
you're
proud.
having short trips. I interrupted you when you said that.
Well, I do short trips. I'll go away for a long weekend, and now that I'm retired, I can
That's nice.
go where I want to go when I want to do it. But Julie Lee, who was here
Yeah,
not
she
too
was
long ago,
a guest on the show. She was awesome.
and I are doing tours because Deb Sandage and I did them together for about 3 years. And with Deb's commitment with Nikon, she really doesn't have the time to do that. So I asked Julie if she would. But right now we're starting off with doing the Southwest Tour, which is Utah and Arizona and the Palouse. And then we're going to start expanding on that
How
in the
cool.
future. So excited about that. But those are next year in April for the Southwest Tour, and the end of May, beginning of June for the Palouse Tour.
Okay. Okay. That
So,
sounds like fun.
it is
Sounds
fun.
like a lot of fun.
It's a lot of work, but it's fun. You get to meet great people,
Yeah.
and
You get to be such close friends when you take a workshop for a week with people
absolutely.
too.
But I find that, aside from the satisfaction of being able to create what I consider to be some good images, the contacts and the people I've met, make
The
everything
photography
worthwhile.
world is a nice world in this part of it anyway.
Yes.
With the like my customers are mostly they're a little bit older, retirees, and they're into landscapes and fine art and things like that, and they all seem very willing to share, and it's fun. I
Well, I think
agree with that.
that's the name of the game, because I can tell somebody that I was in such and such a place yesterday, and I'll say, you can probably put your tripod in my tripod holes. But if they go tomorrow, they're not going to have the same lighting conditions I had today. So, why not share?
Yeah.
I think that's what it's all about.
Now, where can we find you? What's your website?
WayneBennettPhotography.com.
WayneBennettPhotography.com. And
That's it.
we are going to put Wayne's website link, as well as anything that we talked about, in the show notes, including where to get the fabulous Wayne Bennett Smoky
Vision.
Smoky Vision filter.
I'm not sure whether it's in full production yet. But
Oh, is it brand new? Is that
Yes.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
It's taken about 2 years to get it the way I wanted. We had some glitches
Wow.
along the way, and of course, when Bob passed away, that changed things a little bit too. So,
Yeah.
but
Well, we'll put a link to Stingray. In fact,
Yes.
I'm going to maybe try to use your clout to try to maybe interview somebody from there
Oh, absolutely.
on the show. So
I
that
can-
would
I
be
can give
really
you some names.
interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you for being on the show.
it was my pleasure. Really look forward to it and enjoyed it.
Yeah, good. All right. Thank you for watching episode number 105. I'm Peggy Farren with Understand Photography.